Lagos smelled like rain and regret as Kang Hyun-Woo stood outside an apartment building in Lekki, with nothing but the hollow echo of his own laughter from 5 years earlier ringing in his ears. He had rehearsed what to say. He'd rehearsed it on the 14-hour flight, in the taxi from the airport, on the elevator that refused to reach the floor of the woman he had once humiliated in front of 300 people. But now, standing at her door, his hand raised to knock, he could not move, because from inside he heard music and laughter and the unmistakable sound of a woman who no longer needed him to complete her. This, he thought, is what I destroyed. He knocked anyway. Lagos breathed loudest at night. The Echo Hotel ballroom on that Friday in April was packed with the kind of people who measured worth by the cut of a man's suit and the size of a woman's waist. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the polished marble floor, and at the center of it all, 60-year-old Adaeze Nwosu stood in a deep, wine-red gown that clung to every curve she had earned through 6 decades of living. She was not supposed to be the subject of any announcement that night. She had attended the gala as a board member of Nova Bridge Capital, Nigeria's fastest-growing cross-border investment firm, a firm she had helped build from a 4-person startup in a rented Surulere office to a billionaire institution with satellite offices in 3 continents. Her name was in the program. Her picture was in the annual report. She had devoted 11 years of her life to this company. What she had not given was her heart, until she made the mistake of giving it to Kang Hyun-Woo. He was 42 years old, tall in the way Korean men from old money tend to be, quietly commanding, slow to smile, with dark eyes that made you feel like the most important person in every room when they landed on you. He had come to Lagos 18 months earlier as the representative of Kang Global Logistics, a Seoul-based conglomerate seeking African expansion partners. Nova Bridge was the match. Adaeze had led the deal. And somewhere between the 3rd negotiation meeting and the contract signing dinner, something shifted. She should have known better. She had told herself that many times. A woman of 60 does not fall into anything. She steps carefully, with both eyes open. But Hyun-Woo had been patient, unhurried. He brought her baobab flowers that he sourced from a florist who imported them from Dakar. He learned to say "enan," the Igbo term of endearment, with a Korean accent that made her laugh every single time. He held her face in his hands and told her she was the most extraordinary woman he had ever met. And she believed him. For 14 months, she believed him. The gala was supposed to be their first public appearance together. She had told no one about the relationship, not even her daughter, Chisholm, who lived in London. She was not ashamed. She was simply private. A woman like Adaeze Nwosu did not announce love. She practiced it quietly and let it grow in its own season. Although they had kept their relationship private, rumors had begun circulating after they were seen, arriving together at several business events. But Hyun-Woo had announced something that night, just not the something she expected. She heard it before she saw it. A ripple of laughter moving through the crowd near the elevated platform where the MC was standing. Then her name. Then his voice, amplified, slightly slurred from champagne, carrying the casual cruelty of a man who had rehearsed this without realizing it. Someone actually asked me tonight if Adaeze Nwosu is my girlfriend. Laughter. A wave of it. A 60-year-old woman can't be my bride. She can be my mentor, my colleague, my elder. But my bride? My wife? Please. More laughter. Someone clapped. I have a type, and it is not a grandmother. Adaeze stood perfectly still. Her wine glass was in her right hand. She did not shatter it. She did not cry. She did not move for exactly 7 seconds. She counted them later in the silence of her car, because she understood that if she moved, something would break open inside her that she would not be able to close again in public. On the 8th second, she set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray. On the 9th, she picked up her clutch from the table. On the 10th, She walked out of that ballroom with her spine straight and her head lifted, and not one person in that room saw her face. She cried in the car, alone, for 45 minutes. Then she dried her eyes, called her driver, and went home. She did not call Hyun-Woo. She did not send a message. She blocked his number at midnight, deleted his contact, then sat on the balcony of her Lekki apartment, watching the Atlantic Ocean swallow the darkness. "You will not be the reason I shrink," she said to herself, or perhaps to the ocean. "Not you, not anyone." By Monday morning, she had submitted her letter of resignation from Nova Bridge Capital. She was done. 2 months later, Adaeze Nwosu did not dissolve. People who had watched her walk out of that ballroom expected her to disappear quietly, to retreat into the dignified invisibility that society assigned to women her age, who had the audacity to be seen, to be desired, and then to be mocked for it. They expected her to spend her remaining years in the background, useful but unassuming, grateful for whatever scraps of relevance a world obsessed with youth decided to leave her. They did not know Adaeze. The resignation from Nova Bridge had been brewing for 2 years before Hyun-Woo's public humiliation simply cleared the last fog of hesitation. She had been sitting on a business plan, one she had drafted and revised 17 times over 4 years, pulling from every lesson, every mistake, every negotiation she'd ever run across 11 years of cross-border investment work. She called the company Nena Capital. Nena, an Igbo name traditionally associated with a grandmother's wisdom and legacy, felt fitting for the company she wanted to build, a name that evoked the woman who remembers, the woman who holds the root of everything. She registered it in Lagos and Abuja. She used her own funds. She brought in 2 women she had mentored over the years, Bisi Adeyemi, a 34-year-old financial strategist from Ibadan, and Remi Okonkwo, a 41-year-old legal mind who had 3 times turned down partnership at firms that undervalued her. Together, the 3 women built something that made little noise for the first 18 months before becoming impossible to ignore. 3 years later, Nena Capital closed its first anchor deal with a Ghanaian infrastructure consortium worth $200 million. Adaeze stood at a press conference in Accra in a cobalt-blue Ankara blazer, her silver-streaked locks pinned back, her reading glasses on the bridge of her nose, and answered every question with the unhurried precision of a woman who had been practicing this her entire life. A journalist from a South Korean business magazine was in the room. He asked her, because journalists always ask this, whether she had faced any particular obstacles as a woman of her age entering the market with a new firm. Adaeze looked at him over her glasses. "My age," she said, "is the most valuable thing I bring to this table. I have already made all the mistakes. I have already learned which rooms to trust and which rooms to leave. I have already survived every form of dismissal a woman in finance can face. My competitors are still making the mistakes I finished making at 40. So no, my age is not an obstacle. It is the entire point." The quote ran in 4 countries. Her daughter Chisholm in London sent her 72 laughing emojis and a voice note that simply said, "Mama, oh mama." And somewhere in Seoul, a 44-year-old man read that quote over his morning coffee and felt something collapse quietly in the center of his chest. Kang Hyun-Woo had not meant for the words to come out the way they did. He had said this to himself so many times over the years that the sentence had worn smooth from repetition, like a stone carried too long in a pocket. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. He had been drinking. He had been nervous. He had heard someone whisper about him and Adaeze in the corridor, and something, vanity, cowardice, the specific cruelty of a man unused to being caught, wanting something he thought was beneath him, had clawed its way up through the champagne and out of his mouth before he could stop it. He had called her the next morning, and the morning after, and for 3 weeks after that. Her number was dead. He had sent a message to her office. Her assistant replied to say that Ms. Nwosu was no longer with Nova Bridge and that no forwarding contact was available. He hired someone to find her address. The person came back 3 days later and told him that Adaeze Nwosu had apparently stepped out of the professional landscape entirely. He told himself she would resurface eventually. He told himself time would soften things. He told himself a great many comfortable lies, and then he flew back to Seoul and married. 18 months later, a 29-year-old woman named Park Ji-yeon, whose family his mother had selected, and who was perfectly pleasant and perfectly wrong for him in every quiet way that slowly hollows a house into a shell. The marriage survived only 2 years. Ji-yeon left with clarity and without cruelty. "You are always somewhere else," she said, on her way out. "Even when you are here, you are somewhere else entirely." He did not argue. Then the business began to unravel, not dramatically. It never is, with men like Hyun-Woo. It came in the slow accumulation of wrong decisions made by a man who was operating on half a mind, who had started several ventures in Africa on the strength of relationships he had built during his Lagos years, and who now found one by one that those relationships had quietly cooled. Word had traveled, as it often does in business circles, about the kind of man behind the charming negotiator. Combined with a series of poor decisions and strained professional relationships, his reputation slowly began to erode. Adaeze Nwosu was not a woman people easily forgot, and many quietly questioned the judgment of a man who had humiliated someone so widely respected. Not because she made enemies, she didn't, but because she was deeply, quietly beloved by people who moved the levers that mattered. Door after door, each one almost imperceptible, a delayed response to a proposal, a meeting rescheduled and never resumed, a partnership that needed more time and took that time indefinitely. By the time Hyun-Woo understood the full shape of what was happening, Nena Capital had closed its Accra deal, opened a Nairobi office, and been named one of the 20 most influential emerging investment firms on the continent by a publication that reached every boardroom he was trying to enter. He read the profile of Adaeze Nwosu from beginning to end. He read it again. He had sat in his apartment in Gangnam at 3 a.m. and held his phone until the screen went dark, and when it went dark, he saw his own reflection in the black glass. He looked like a man who had dropped something precious off a balcony and was watching it, 5 stories below, become more beautiful. Adaeze heard the knock on a Saturday. She was in the kitchen, making jollof rice from scratch the way her mother had taught her. Charring the tomatoes first, frying the paste in enough oil to make a cardiologist weep, adding her bay leaves in the precise order and moment that she could no longer explain to anyone because it lived in her hands, not her head. Chisholm was on the balcony on a video call, laughing at something. She had flown in from London for the week, which was the best reason Adaeze knew to cook properly. Her housekeeper, Mama Ngozi, answered the door. Adaeze heard the pause before she heard the voice, that specific pause of someone faced with a visitor who does not fit the expected category. "Good morning. My name is Kang Hyun-Woo. I would like to speak with Mrs. Nwosu, please." Adaeze set her wooden spoon down slowly on the ceramic rest beside the stove. She untied her apron. She folded it precisely. She placed it on the counter. She walked to the sitting room doorway. Not to the front door, just to the doorway. And she looked at the man standing in her entrance with his hands clasped in front of him, and his suit slightly rumpled from travel, and his face carrying 5 years of reckoning in every line. He saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked older, not badly. Men like him did not age badly, but honestly. The easy confidence she remembered had been replaced by something more careful, more earned, more afraid. "Good," said a small and honest part of her. "Adaeze," he said. Her name in his mouth after 5 years felt like a word from another language. "I know I have no right. I know there is nothing I can say that undoes what I said, but I flew for 14 hours to stand here and say it anyway, because I owe you that, at minimum." Chisholm had appeared behind her mother in the doorway. She looked at the Korean man at the door, then at her mother, and something passed across her face. Recognition, calculation, fierce protective instinct. And she said nothing. She waited. Adaeze looked at Hyun-Woo for a long moment. "You should have called," she said finally. "Your number is different, and I was not sure you would answer." "I would not have." A pause. "Then I am glad I came in person," he said. She did not let him in. Not that day. She told him, at the door, without cruelty and without warmth, that she had 11 minutes before her rice finished, and that she was not going to burn jollof for the first time in 40 years because of him. She gave Mama Ngozi a look that communicated everything, and Mama Ngozi closed the door politely. Chisholm followed her mother back to the kitchen. "Mama, stir this, clockwise." "Mama, clockwise, Chisholm. The rice doesn't know you have questions." Chisholm stirred. She waited. She had inherited her mother's patience and her mother's stubbornness in exactly equal measure, which meant she would stir that rice for as long as was necessary. "That was him," Chisholm said finally. Not a question. "Yes." "He came from Seoul, apparently. What do you want to do?" Adaeze took the spoon back, tasted the rice, added a pinch of salt. She considered the question with the same care she gave to every important decision, not rushing, not avoiding, simply standing in the full weight of it until the answer became clear. "I want to eat jollof rice with my daughter," she said, "and then I will decide." She saw him again on the third day, not because she relented. She never relented from a considered position, but because he came back each morning with a quiet persistence that annoyed her and eventually impressed her against her will. He did not knock. He sat in the lobby of her building with a book and waited, and when Mama Ngozi reported this, Adaeze did something she had not done in 5 years. She laughed. Not at him, not exactly. At the absurdity of the universe, that this man had walked out of a ballroom on the strength of his own ego and walked back in through the smallest door available, a lobby chair, a book, and the specific humility of someone who had run out of better ideas. She went downstairs on the third morning with 2 cups of tea. She sat across from him in the lobby. She said, "You have 20 minutes," she said. "Use them well." He used them. He did not make excuses. He did not ask for another chance. He said precisely and without theater what he had done, why he believed he had done it. The fear, the pride, the way he had been performing strength his entire life in ways that required him to diminish things he did not understand, and what the years since had cost him. Not financially. He was careful to say that. Not professionally. He said those losses were deserved. "What I lost," he said, "was the only relationship that ever made me feel like myself without trying. And I destroyed it because I was afraid of what other people thought of a man who loves a woman he is not supposed to love." Adaeze held her tea with both hands. "And now?" she asked. "Now I am 62 years old and I have stopped caring what other people think." "You are 47. I feel 62. She almost smiled. Almost. "Go home, Hyun-Woo," she said. "Not forever, but for now. I am not something you recover in a lobby." He nodded. He stood. He handed her back his empty cup. "Will you let me try the proper way?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had broken something in her and then had the nerve, the audacity, the specific courage of the truly regretful to come and stand in the evidence of what she had built without him and ask to begin again. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. It was more than he deserved, and they both knew it. 6 months later, Adaeze Nwosu received a phone call from the same South Korean business magazine whose journalist had quoted her in Accra. They were running a feature on cross-continental partnerships, specifically a newly announced joint venture between Nena Capital and the restructured African division of Kang Global Logistics, a deal that had been quietly negotiated over 12 weeks and that represented the single largest inbound Korean investment into West African infrastructure in 7 years. The journalist asked her how the partnership had come together. Adaeze was quiet for a moment. Outside her office window, Lagos hummed and shimmered in the June heat. On her desk, beside her laptop, was a small ceramic cup. Not hers, not particularly beautiful, that had been left in her lobby 3 months ago by a man who had flown 14 hours to stand outside her door. She had kept it. She wasn't entirely sure why she had kept it. "It came together," she said finally, "the way most worthwhile things do. Slowly, with difficulty, and only after the people involved were honest enough about what they had gotten wrong." "And the personal dimension?" the journalist pressed carefully. "There are reports." "There are always reports," Adaeze said. "I don't live inside reports. I live inside my actual life." She ended the call. She picked up the cup. She thought about the morning 5 years ago when she had set down a wine glass in a ballroom and walked out with her spine straight. She thought about the 11 years she had given to a company that was never hers. She thought about the night she had cried alone in a car and then dried her eyes and built an empire because it was the only response to humiliation that made sense to her. She thought about a man in a lobby with a book, about 20 minutes of honest speech, about the specific courage it takes not to forgive, not immediately, but to remain open enough to allow for the possibility. She was 65 now. Her locks were fully silver. Her reading glasses had been upgraded twice. She slept well. She ate jollof rice on Saturdays. She had a company that bore the name for grandmother, and she ran it like the woman she had always been, with the wisdom she'd always carried and the scars that had made that wisdom real. She set the cup back down. Outside, Lagos continued its magnificent, relentless noise. She picked up her pen. She picked up her pen. There was still work to do. Adaeze Nwosu was never defined by the night she was humiliated. She was defined by everything she built afterward. Some people lose love and disappear. She lost love, built an empire, and became unforgettable. And that was the greatest answer she could ever have given him.